My name is Natalie Cruz. I'm 35 years old. 8 years ago, I walked out of a corporate marketing job I hated and poured every dollar of my savings into a small storefront with cracked mirrors and outdated chairs. I turned it into Bloom's Salon and Spa, a place people now drive across town for, a place with a 2-week waiting list for a simple haircut because of the reputation I built one client at a time. I didn't inherit a client list. I didn't inherit connections. I got my cosmetology license at 24, worked under other stylists for 3 years learning everything I could, and then took every risk I had to open my own space. I worked 6 days a week for years. I skipped vacations. I built relationships with vendors, trained my staff myself, and personally handled every license renewal, every health inspection, every insurance policy that kept the doors legally open. My parents were proud, or at least that's what I always believed. Whenever they visited, my mother would sit in the waiting area, watching clients come and go, smiling at the framed photos of before and afters on the wall. "You've built something impressive, Natalie." My father would nod along. "Your grandmother would have loved this. She always did hair for the neighborhood, you know." Hearing that meant everything to me. My cousin Isabel was 29, talented behind the chair, genuinely gifted with color and styling, but chronically unable to hold a job for more than a year. She'd worked at 4 different salons, each time leaving after a conflict with management or a dispute over commission. Whenever she was between jobs, my aunt and my parents would step in, covering rent, smoothing things over, insisting she just hadn't found the right fit yet. That a change of management had occurred at this facility. Under state cosmetology board regulations, any change in the responsible managing licensee requires formal notification and re-verification within 5 business days. That notification listed an individual. She glanced at her notes, Isabel Cruz, as the acting manager. Our records show Isabel Cruz's cosmetology license was suspended 8 months ago, following an unresolved client complaint. Operating under an unlicensed or suspended manager is a direct violation, and we are required to shut down operations until this is resolved. I turned to Isabel, stunned. "Your license was suspended?" She looked away, saying nothing. I looked back at the inspector. "I never notified anyone of a management change. I am the sole licensed owner and operator of this salon." The inspector checked her paperwork again. "We received a signed notification form 3 days ago, submitted by an Isabel Cruz, claiming operational authority." I felt the ground shift beneath me. Isabel hadn't just assumed control informally. She had filed something with the state, using her own name without my knowledge, while holding a suspended license that she had never once mentioned to me. "I need everything reversed immediately," I said. "I never authorized this filing." The inspector nodded slowly. "You'll need to submit corrected documentation and request an emergency reinstatement review. Until then, this facility remains closed." My hands were shaking as I called my staff together and told them to send clients home for the day. Then I called the one person who could help me untangle this mess. "Miss Ferreira, it's Natalie Cruz. I need you right away." My licensing attorney's voice was calm but urgent. "Tell me everything from the beginning." The next morning I sat across from Ms. Ferreira, the same attorney who had helped me file Bloom's original business license 8 years earlier, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. "Tell me honestly," I said. "How bad is this?" Ms. Ferreira reviewed the filing Isabel had submitted, her expression sharpening as she read. "This is fixable, but it was reckless." Isabel submitted a management change notification listing herself as the responsible licensee, using a license the board suspended months ago. She either didn't know how serious that was, or she gambled that no one would check. "They forgot one clause," I said quietly. "The clause in my original operating agreement that requires state notification and license verification for any change of managing authority. Nobody checked it. Nobody even mentioned it." "Exactly," Ms. Ferreira said. "And unfortunately, the state doesn't care about family dynamics. They care about licensing compliance. We need to file emergency corrected paperwork today, proving you are the sole licensed owner and manager, and that the change filed under Isabel's name was unauthorized." We spent the entire afternoon compiling documentation, my original license, my continuing education certificates, insurance records, everything proving I had never relinquished operational control. By evening, Ms. Ferreira had filed an emergency request for reinstatement, along with a formal statement disputing the unauthorized filing. Meanwhile, word had already spread. A closed salon with a tape notice on the door doesn't stay quiet in a small business district. Clients called, confused and concerned. My staff, unpaid for the day, were anxious about their jobs. Everything I had built over 8 years was hanging in the balance because of paperwork filed without my knowledge. That evening, I drove to my parents' house, still in yesterday's clothes, exhausted and furious. Isabel was there, sitting quietly at the kitchen table, unable to meet my eyes. "You filed something with the state," I said, "using a suspended license." Without telling me. She finally looked up, her voice small. "I didn't think it would actually get checked that fast. I just wanted to prove I could run it." "You didn't just risk your own reputation," I said. "You shut down a business 12 people depend on for their income." Clients who've been coming to me for years had appointments canceled with no explanation. My mother's face was pale. "We had no idea her license had been suspended." "Neither did I said. "Because none of you thought to ask before deciding she should run my salon." My father, quiet until now, finally spoke. "This is worse than we realized." "Yes," I said. "It is." 5 days after the notice first appeared on my door, the state board approved the emergency reinstatement, confirming me as the sole licensed operator and lifting the shutdown order. I reopened Bloom on a Monday morning, personally calling every client whose appointment had been affected, apologizing individually, offering discounts to rebuild the trust that had been shaken through no fault of their own. It took weeks to fully recover the momentum we'd lost. Some clients understood immediately. Few didn't return at all. The financial hit from 5 lost operating days, plus the discounts I offered to make things right, cost more than I wanted to calculate. A week after reopening, my mother called and asked if we could talk, just the two of us. We met at a small cafe near the salon. She looked smaller than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. "I'm sorry, Natalie," she said, her voice breaking. "We spent so many years believing Isabel just needed one real chance that we never stopped to ask what it would cost you if that chance went wrong." I nodded slowly. I never wanted to compete with my cousin. I only wanted what I built to be respected and protected as mine. "You deserved that," she whispered. "We just didn't give it to you." Isabel eventually completed the process to reinstate her own license properly, working under supervision at a smaller salon while she rebuilt her standing with the board. She called me a few months later. Her voice quieter than I'd heard it in years. "I finished my supervised hours," she said. "License is fully active again. Earned this time, not assumed." There was something different in her voice. Not entitlement. Accountability. "That's a good place to start," I told her. That Christmas, for the first time in years, our family gathered without an agenda hidden beneath the surface. No arguments about the salon. No quiet assumptions disguised as help. Just an honest dinner full of the kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. My father raised his glass before we ate. I used to think giving Isabel opportunities meant handing her things before she was ready. I understand now that all it did was put everyone, including her, at risk. Later that night, I sat alone in the salon after closing, the chairs empty, the mirrors reflecting the quiet glow of the reception lights. 8 years of my life were built into every license renewal, every client relationship, every piece of paperwork I had filed carefully and on time. The salon was never just a business. It was proof of every responsible decision I had made, and refused to let anyone else's shortcut put at risk again. Sometimes the people who love us make painful mistakes, mistaking good intentions for due diligence. Forgiveness matters. But so do boundaries, and so does doing things properly. Because protecting what you've built with your own hands is never selfish. And that is the one tiny clause my family almost forgot to check. I never resented her for it. I told myself every family has someone who struggles to find their footing. I never needed anyone to hand me anything. I built Bloom with my own 2 hands, and that felt like enough. Then 6 months ago, everything changed. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening. "Natalie, we need to talk. As a family. It's important." I drove to my parents' house straight from closing the salon, my feet aching from a 12-hour day. Isabel was already at the table. So was my aunt. The room felt different the moment I walked in. No one smiled. My mother cleared her throat. Isabel just left her job at Lux Salon. Another conflict with management. We think it's time she had something stable, something of her own. I looked at my cousin. She shrugged, the same way she always did when consequences arrived, like they were simply bad luck rather than a pattern. Then my aunt reached across the table and set her hand over mine. Honey, we've been thinking. You've built such a strong business. Maybe it's time to let Isabel take over Bloom. She's talented. She could run it beautifully. You could always start something new. I sat there for a moment, certain I had misheard her. You want me to give Isabel my salon? Not give, my mother said quickly. Just let her run it. Keep it in the family. It's already in the family, I said. It's mine. Isabel finally spoke, her voice light, almost dismissive. Come on, Natalie. Just a salon. You could open a new one easily. Just a salon. To her, maybe. To me, it was 8 years of 12-hour days, every license renewal filed on time, every inspection passed, every ounce of my late 20s and early 30s. I stood up. I'm not handing my salon to anyone. My aunt's expression hardened. So you'd rather watch Isabel struggle again? I answered calmly, though my hands were trembling. I'd rather she learn to build something the way I had to. Isabel slammed her palm on the table. So you think you're better than me now? No, I said. I just made different choices, and I've handled things you've never had to think about. The argument dragged on for nearly an hour. Eventually I walked out, heartbroken and furious in equal measure. As I drove home, I kept wondering how the people who raised me to work hard could suddenly expect me to hand away everything I had built with my own hands. I had no idea they had already begun making plans behind my back, and that within days, state inspectors would be standing outside my own salon with a notice to shut it down. I barely slept that night. My mother's words kept circling in my mind. You could always start something new. As if 8 years of licensing paperwork and compliance history could simply be rebuilt overnight. The next morning I opened the salon like always, reviewing the day's appointments, checking in with my staff. Work had always been my refuge. That morning, even the familiar rhythm of the salon couldn't settle the unease sitting in my chest. 3 days later my mother called again. Natalie, can you stop by the salon this afternoon? We'd like to finish the conversation properly. Her voice was unusually bright, and something about that brightness made my stomach tighten. Still, I agreed, telling myself this could still be resolved like reasonable adults sitting down together. When I arrived that afternoon, Isabel's car was already parked outside, next to a car I didn't recognize. Inside, a man in a gray suit sat in the waiting area, a leather folder open on his lap. My mother stood as I walked in, smiling like everything was already settled. Natalie, this is Mr. Holloway. He's a business consultant. We thought it would help to have things explained properly. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a conversation. This was an ambush dressed up in polite language. Mr. Holloway shook my hand and gestured toward the reception desk. Ms. Cruz, I understand the family would like to formalize a transition in management. Given Isabel's talent and your family's wishes, we've drafted a straightforward operating handover. I stared at the documents. Business transfer forms. My salon's name typed neatly at the top, waiting for a signature I had no intention of giving. Isabel leaned against the reception desk, arms crossed, watching me the way someone watches an outcome they already believe is decided. It's not forever, Natalie. Just until I get my footing. I looked at her steadily. The last 4 salons were also just until you got your footing. Her jaw tightened, but she had nothing to say to that. My aunt's voice softened, the way it always did right before asking for something. Honey, this is what family does. We help each other. I took a slow breath. No. My answer hasn't changed. My mother's face darkened. Think carefully, Natalie. If you turn your back on your cousin now, don't expect this family to be there for you later. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I've never once asked this family for help. Not before I built this place and not after. I stood, pushed the untouched papers back across the desk, and walked toward the door. Before I left, I turned around one last time. I love this family, but I will not apologize for protecting what I built with my own hands. Then I walked out, got in my car and drove home with my hands trembling on the wheel. 2 days later, I arrived at the salon to find something I never expected. A state inspector's vehicle was parked outside, and a printed notice was taped to the front door. Cease operations, licensing violation. My stomach lurched as I hurried inside. Isabel stood near the reception desk, arguing quietly with an inspector while my staff stood frozen, clients halfway through appointments looking around in confusion. The inspector turned to me as I approached. "Are you the owner of this establishment?" "Yes," I said. "Natalie Cruz. What's happening here?" She held up a clipboard. "We received notification.